The moment Victoria Caldwell saw her daughter standing on her own 2 feet, the world seemed to stop. For 6 years, little Grace had never taken a single step without assistance. Doctors had warned Victoria that her daughter might never walk normally, and Victoria had spent millions on specialists, therapies, equipment, and private clinics across the United States. Yet on a quiet autumn morning outside a small community center in Chicago, Grace suddenly pushed herself away from her wheelchair and ran across the pavement toward a stranger, a tired-looking single father holding the hand of his young son. Victoria froze, unable to breathe, because Grace wasn't simply walking. She was running. And the man she was running toward was someone Victoria had never seen before, but somehow her daughter seemed to recognize him. Before we discover why, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the person we least expect can change our lives forever. Victoria had everything money could buy except the one thing she wanted most, to see her daughter live without fear. At 38, she was one of America's most successful entrepreneurs, the founder of a technology company that had grown from a small garage project into a billion-dollar corporation. Newspapers called her brilliant, unstoppable, and fearless. But behind the expensive suits, private jets, and enormous mansions stood a mother who spent countless nights sitting beside Grace's bed, quietly wondering whether she had failed her child. Grace had been injured in a terrible accident when she was 2 years old. Her legs had been left severely weakened, and despite years of rehabilitation, she had never regained the ability to walk independently. Victoria refused to give up. She hired the best therapists, built a rehabilitation room inside their home, and traveled across the country searching for another answer. Grace, however, slowly began to believe that her wheelchair was not only part of her life, but the boundary of it. Then came the morning that changed everything. Victoria had taken Grace to a neighborhood community center because Grace had recently become interested in a children's art program. Victoria wanted her daughter to experience something ordinary, away from doctors and therapists. She was standing near the entrance when she noticed a man sitting on a bench with a little boy beside him. His clothes were simple, his shoes were worn, and there was a quiet sadness in his face that Victoria immediately recognized. His name was Nathan Brooks, a single father who worked maintenance jobs around the city while raising his 8-year-old son, Caleb. Nathan had no expensive car, no influential friends, and no connection to Victoria's world. Yet Grace stared at him as though she had known him for years. Without warning, Grace gripped the sides of her wheelchair and pulled herself upright. Victoria's heart slammed against her chest. She reached for her daughter, terrified that Grace would fall, but Grace pushed forward. One small step, then another. Her knees trembled, her face tightened with effort, and tears filled Victoria's eyes. Then Grace took another step, and another, until she suddenly began moving faster. She wasn't crawling. She wasn't being supported. She was running. Victoria watched in disbelief as her daughter crossed the pavement and rushed straight toward Nathan. Nathan looked up in shock. Grace wrapped her arms around his waist, and Nathan immediately crouched down to make sure she was safe. Victoria ran toward them, crying and frightened at the same time. She demanded to know who he was and why her daughter had reacted to him that way. Nathan looked genuinely confused. He explained that he had never met Grace before. But then Caleb quietly reminded his father of something that made Nathan's face change. Months earlier, Nathan had volunteered at a rehabilitation charity that delivered art supplies to children with mobility challenges. One of the children had drawn a picture of a little girl running through a field. Nathan had written a simple message on the back of the picture: "Never let someone else's idea of your limits become your own." Victoria stared at Grace. The picture was hanging inside her daughter's room. Suddenly, the pieces began falling into place. Grace had received that picture months earlier. She had kept it beside her bed. Nathan had no idea that the little girl who received it was Victoria's daughter. He had simply encouraged a child he had never met because he understood something about impossible odds. But Nathan had another secret, one he had hidden from almost everyone. Years earlier, Nathan had been a talented medical researcher working on rehabilitation technology. His research had focused on helping people with severe mobility problems regain independence. He had been brilliant, but his career collapsed after a wealthy investor stole his research and blamed Nathan for a failed clinical project. Nathan lost his job, his reputation, and almost everything he owned. His wife, unable to handle the financial pressure and public humiliation, eventually left him and their young son. Nathan never told people the whole story because he was tired of explaining his pain. He simply started over. Victoria's company had unknowingly purchased part of the same technology years earlier. When Nathan discovered who Victoria was, he wanted to leave. He feared she would recognize his name and accuse him of something connected to the old scandal. Instead, Victoria asked him to stay. She had spent years searching for someone who could understand Grace's condition from both a scientific and human perspective. Nathan had both knowledge and compassion. Over the following months, something extraordinary happened. Nathan began helping Grace with simple exercises, not as a doctor, but as someone who understood the emotional battle behind rehabilitation. He never treated her like a fragile child. He challenged her gently, celebrated every small victory, and reminded her that progress was not measured by how quickly she moved, but by how bravely she tried. Victoria began changing too. For years, she had tried to solve Grace's struggles with money. Nathan taught her that sometimes a child needed encouragement more than another expensive machine. Victoria started spending evenings at home instead of working late. She listened when Grace talked. She laughed with her. She stopped measuring her daughter's future by medical predictions. Then one evening, Nathan finally told Victoria the truth about his past. He showed her old research papers proving that his work had been stolen. Victoria's company investigated the records and discovered that Nathan had been telling the truth. The technology connected to his research had eventually become extremely valuable. Victoria could have offered him money and ended the matter quietly. Instead, she did something Nathan never expected. She publicly acknowledged his contribution, restored his professional reputation, and offered him the opportunity to lead a new rehabilitation research foundation. Nathan refused at first. He didn't want charity. Victoria told him it wasn't charity.
It was a second chance.
Months later, the foundation opened its first rehabilitation center in Chicago. Grace was there for the opening ceremony. She still used her wheelchair when she became tired, and her journey was far from over. But that day she stood beside Nathan and Caleb while hundreds of people applauded. Victoria watched her daughter take several careful steps across the stage. Grace reached Nathan, smiled, and held out her hand. Nathan took it. For Victoria, that moment was worth more than every billion-dollar deal she had ever signed. She finally understood that sometimes miracles don't arrive with flashing lights or expensive technology. Sometimes they arrive disguised as a struggling father, carrying an old wound, raising a child, and quietly giving hope to someone else while trying to find his own. And Nathan learned something too. A person can lose a career, a home, a reputation, and years of their life without losing the ability to begin again. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may need a reminder that second chances are real, and subscribe for more emotional stories like this. Your support helps these stories reach people who need a little hope. Before the ending, comment, "Kindness deserves a second chance," if you believe that one act of kindness can change someone's entire life. Years later, Grace would still remember the morning she first ran toward Nathan. She didn't remember the expensive doctors, the cameras, or the worried adults surrounding her. She remembered a simple message on the back of a drawing: never let someone else's idea of your limits become your own. Victoria kept that drawing framed in her office. And every time she looked at it, she remembered the day her daughter ran toward a stranger and, without knowing it, ran straight toward her future. Sometimes the person who changes your life doesn't arrive with wealth, power, or a perfect past. Sometimes they arrive carrying their own broken pieces. And sometimes, when two wounded hearts meet at exactly the right moment, they don't destroy each other. They help each other heal.
The end.